If you read the 15th chapter of Genesis, you read about Abram, who is justified by God because he has faith. And then in the 16th chapter, he immediately went out and screwed around. Her name was Hagar, and she was not his wife. And then as you move into the 17th chapter of John, there is repentance, and his name is changed to Abraham, the father of nations. And the interesting thing about that passage in Genesis that I just quoted from is that in the 15th chapter of Genesis, Abram is 86 years old. In the 17th chapter of Genesis, Abraham is 99 years old. That meant for 14 years, he heard nothing from God. The promise had been made, and when God didn't seem to move on it, he decided, I'm going to do something about it myself. And at his wife's urging, he tried to produce a son who would fulfill the promise that God had made. And you know where that went. South, bad, death and destruction. And yet God never let Abram go until he gave him the name Abraham and spoke clearly the promise of the future from which we benefit in our time. But what do you do with those 14 years? Do you have 14 years in your life? I do. When I pled that he would speak to me, that I did everything that I knew. When I wanted to hear from him desperately, when I couldn't believe and said, if you would just talk to me, I would follow you and I would do everything you said. But the silence of God, and you begin to understand Pascal's comment, the silence scares me to death. And when he speaks, I don't know if I even want to hear him. And so we have to deal with the 14 years in our lives, just as Abraham does, just as Mother Teresa did, just as every Christian you ever met who is mature, who's been walking with Jesus for a long time, had to deal with it. It's called the dark night of the soul, and it's a time when God seems to have gone away on vacation somewhere, and he just doesn't speak.